morning and welcome to Power Talk Live. Today is Tuesday, it's the 23rd of October. I'm your host Ronald Thwaites and I'm joined by my co-host Ross and Hammond of Real Business. And this is the program where we get to the heart of things. We combine radio and television, broadcasting live on Power 106 FM and Jamaica News Network, JNN. And we start off as usual with the bottom line. Rasan, greetings, morning.
Morning, Ronnie.
I noticed an article in the Observer today that I thought would be a good start-off point for the bottom line.
Okay.
And it's on page 14 of the Observer, and it's entitled Latin America and the Caribbean of Tomorrow Depend on Its Children Today.
Yes.
And it's written by Jorge Familiar, who is Vice President of the World Bank for Latin America and the Caribbean.
Okay.
Clearly a man of some substance.
Yes, yes.
The World Bank does not appoint slight people
to
those offices. And what he's pointing to is something we have said, but perhaps not emphasized enough. Socrates said, good pedagogy means continuous repetition.
Right.
And he's saying that gives the example of a young man from Costa Rica who has come back from studies and has set up a very high-tech institute. The first Central American satellite into space has been, to monitor climate change, has been launched by him because of his own and other high level of human capital.
Yes.
And he goes, this Senor Familiar goes on to say that human capital has long been recognized as key for countries to enhance the productivity and growth needed to end poverty. And points out what is a truism, but we so often take for granted, that you can't build a society, you can't reduce poverty without an educated and healthy workforce. Let me go on, that can compete in an increasingly globalized economy and respond to the changing nature of work and new technologies.
Yes.
Now, are we doing that well enough? Costa Rican example is nice. It's close enough by. It's our type of people.
Right.
But are we? Can we pass that same test, get the same praise as that country seems to be?
No, and that is why Costa Rica is growing faster than us. That is why Costa Rica is able to attract more quality foreign direct investment flows from companies such as Intel and those companies because of the quality of its human resources. So it creates a virtuous cycle. All things that we have been saying yesterday, I had been saying, and I said it on the program with other people, was the Prime Minister's comment, superfluous comment on Saturday about building 20-story buildings, that more of the 1 trillion which the banking sector sits atop, more of the 640 billion in pension funds should be allocated to doing those things. Now, we are saying that
remembering also that he's talking not about his money,
yes,
but about our
people's
money,
yes,
the people's money,
yes,
at all times.
Yes.
When government speaks about money,
yes,
sometimes the temptation is
yes,
to appropriate it to make it seem as if it's your gift, your
precisely
generosity. It's
right,
not.
Right.
It's our people.
Right. So you were saying that more of the 1 trillion which the banks hold on behalf of depositors, more of the $640 billion which the various institutions hold on behalf of our pensioners should be pumped into the building of 20-story buildings for residential purposes. And we are saying no. We want to see more of that money being pumped into developing the country's human resources. We want to see more of that money being pumped into investments in new technologies, new capital stock, into the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises sector, so that we can develop a stable economy and a sound economy.
But why don't we listen to the advice being given? They're not always right, but they do have a depth of intellect. Here's what Mr. Familiar of the World Bank says. Physical capital, like your 20-story building, is relatively easy to measure, but human capital is not. That's why the World Bank has been working to synthesize in a single index the health and educational conditions that most affect the productivity of each country.
Precisely.
Yes? The result is the first edition of the Human Capital Index, launched in 2018 at the IMF at Bali, which we've referred to.
Yes.
Okay? And index ranks each country by its human capital, a tool to monitor progress and to help focus efforts on the most relevant dimensions of human capital.
Right.
I want to see that study and to see where Jamaica fits in it. He speaks about it speaks about the quality of education, yes, and in Latin America and the Caribbean, of which we are a part, children underperform on standardized tests. They are in school, but they are not learning, dragging down the average index score for the region.
Correct. And one of the things that we also saw was that the same World Bank released its competitive index over the weekend, and we dropped one place from 69 to 70. So we are halfway. We are 70 out of 140.
But if we really want to be prosperous, we have to be more like in the top 90%.
Which means that we must put more money on education and training, science and technology and research and development rather than 20-story buildings.
Well, listen again.
Yes.
The article says, what's more, there's a wide disparity. This is as a result of the study. They found out a wide disparity in the ranking between countries with similar income levels because of the quality of education.
Yes.
Panama has a similar income level as Uruguay, but it is significantly lower in the index. Why? Because of its educational results.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes. Yes.
So the question arises then, how are we going to make every early childhood institution a place of excellence?
Yes.
How are we going to make primary schools, all nearly 800 of them,
yes.
have a similar quality?
Yes.
I can hear the sighs of desperation coming forth already, saying that's not possible.
Yes.
How are we going to make every high school
yes.
a strong academic, technical, and above all, place of social,
yes.
competent outcomes?
Right.
And if we don't ask ourselves those questions and invest accordingly,
yes.
then it seems to me we will always be on the bottom end of the productivity index.
Precisely. And it means that we'll have to allocate more of those scarce resources to those sectors and ensure that we get quality from the money that we spend.
Well, wait a minute, Mr. Hammond, because I'm really grounding this discussion in the World Bank's assessment. Progress, yes?
Yes.
This means in improving educational results, is within our reach, they argue.
Yes.
But it's not about spending more.
Yes.
It's about spending better.
Precisely.
No, we need more. Yes. I'm agreeing with you.
And spend it better.
But we need to spend it better.
Yes.
My own perception is that we are spending about a quarter of our large educational budget
yes.
less efficiently
yes.
than we could.
Yes.
And
yes.
if I wanted to be more blunt, I would say we are wasting it.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Now, what the purpose on the bottom line, as everybody knows, our listeners, our viewers, is not to curse any political administration or to darken the repute of any administrator. What we want to do is to face our future, by facing our present,
yes.
and making the appropriate corrections. And in this case, the uneven education system that we have, by all efforts in trying to improve it, much credit for that, but we need to leap and jump far higher
yes.
and far more successfully than we have up to now.
And it is both possible and probable if we just make up our minds to do better.
Yes. Okay. It says educational spending has grown a lot over the past 2 decades and now accounts for the greatest share of public spending. This is in our region, no
yes.
doubt including us.
Yes.
However, the lack of better educational results suggests that this spending has not been very efficient.
Yes.
Before increasing spending, countries must seriously rethink their educational strategies.
Correct.
Yes, and it says something else too at the end. It says that once you do that, the young people will take care of the rest.
Yes.
And I firmly believe that.
Yeah, that's fundamental.
The best thing that a family, a parent can ever do with any of their resources, yes, their fortunes, is to ensure that their children and all other children that they have any influence over can have the best education possible. Jamaicans know this, you know.
Yes.
And it is unfortunately those of us who have responsibility in whatever capacity, public or private, to make that a solemn commitment.
Yes.
It's called elsewhere a covenant.
Precisely. And I mean, if we were to continue in relation to connectivity, if you spent better on education, then you would need to spend less. You'd spend less on national security.
Well, this is it. Before we go to the break, may I commend the administration of Northern Caribbean University, who are featured in the press today as launching a very ambitious 10 million US fund for support of students who register there but have inability to pay fees.
Okay.
And they, the president there, whose name escapes me, is saying, look here, this is a national security expenditure.
Yes.
Yes. Supporting students who are able and are willing but can't afford is a national security experience. Investment.
Precisely.
We take a break. The bottom line will continue when we return. Stay tuned. Thanks for being on the bottom line. It's Powertalk Live on Jnn and Power 106. Ratzenheimon, part of the issue of spending efficiently relates us to the financial system.
Yes.
And it has been a strong contention by many, including both of us, that the efficiencies of the use of our savings, of our capital, is not what it should be at all. And in fact, this is largely mediated by the banking system, which sees to their own efficiency or their own profitability, but leaves many of the rest of us in the lurch. We get paid 0.6% for our savings. And if we turn around and want to borrow, we have to pay upwards of 14%, except you're buying some car which will clog up the environment and cost more foreign exchange. All right. So the issue has long been now that there should be some modification of the arbitrary charges made by banks. And of course, I'm referring to colleague Fitzjackson's pending legislation, pending so long it's grown a beard, and the beard is white, regarding the extortionate bank fees. Yeah. Now,
extortionate spreads, extortionate bank fees.
No, okay. Well, you know, normally, in any self-respecting industry, to have the two of us say this, if there was a defense, the institutions would file a suit against us, wouldn't they?
Yes.
But they can't, because it's true.
Yes.
And truth is always a defense to libel, because we're not libeling, we're speaking fairly.
Yes.
And then now we hear, do we not, that the government has gone all the way to Belgium to find a group of consultants to pay foreign exchange to investigate the competitiveness of the local banking sector. Well, you know, with great respect and humility, we could have told them. Well, it's patent obvious, isn't it?
Precisely, and this is a matter that we have been talking about from the days when Dr. Omar Davies was finance minister. The members of the banking sector used to say to Dr. Davies, boy, you need to reduce the cash reserve ratio, you need to reduce the liquidity ratio, the government needs to stop run fiscal deficits. All of that stopped. Yes. Benchmark interest rates are now at their lowest levels in the history of Jamaica. And we hear the administration has now contracted Men's SPRL from Belgium on September 24 to conduct a study of the behavior of the financial sector, which we all know for 3 decades.
Well, what they're going to do now is when Fitzjackson's bill ever sees the light of day in Parliament again, they're going to say, oh no, we can't take it, or oh no, we can't vote for it, because we have to wait on this study, which was promised a year ago, but is now just being elevated. And you know, granted it's early days yet, but if these consultants come, not that we should wait on them, then I wonder who they're going to talk to.
No, they have been working for a month now, from September 24, and nobody within, no.
I'm sure they have
to Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson never knew of the study.
This is the Small Business Association. Who are the ones getting extorted most?
Precisely. Mr. Wignall of the MSME Alliance never knew about the study, let alone the consultants.
So the likelihood then is, or the suspicion, and I'm always careful of using, speaking about suspect things, but it's reasonable to infer Yes, that they've been talking to the very people,
same people.
who are vehemently opposed to protect the public's interest
Correct.
in respect of their financial resources.
Precisely.
Yes? So I would love to know what is the terms of reference
Of that
study.
Precisely.
I'm going to invite Fitz Jackson to ask appropriate questions
Yes.
today.
Yes.
And to what stage they have reached.
Precisely.
And who indeed they're going to consult.
Precisely.
Because, please again, it's not the government spending somebody else's money to do this. It is our money
Yes.
that they are spending.
Yes.
And therefore there is a responsibility for them to be entirely transparent.
Correct.
In this regard.
Yes. Yes. The study is also coming at a time when the Bankers Association has a new president, who incidentally is my friend, David Noel. And he's saying to the public of Jamaica, by the way, if you want us to change this rent-seeking behavior, you better reduce our taxes.
I heard you with Hilton Dennis the other evening on this.
Yes.
But I'm distressed with that. I don't know Mr. Noel, but I do know that he's a Georgian.
Yes.
And at St. George's, our logic is ought to be a little bit straighter.
Yes.
Because you can't do that. What is the business of a bank?
Yes.
The business of a bank is to provide to take deposits.
Precisely.
And to give loans.
Yes. Intermediation.
Yes. Intermediation.
Yes.
Okay. Now you are making hopelessly large profits.
Precisely.
On the basis of currency trading
Yes.
and fees and,
Yes.
and a smaller
Yes.
loan book.
Right.
And so you now wish to be insulated further from any risk.
Yes.
Yes. By the state.
Yes.
By state action.
Yes.
Rather than by any efficiencies or different policies on your behalf.
Precisely.
Well, I'm sure the shareholders in Toronto will be happy.
Yes.
But will the farmers of Jamaica, for example, receive similar elation?
No.
I doubt it.
No.
So where are we in Jamaica now as a country going somewhere? Where is it in terms of moving Jamaica forward, if that is the kind of attitude? And I'm hoping that your friendship will allow you to educate him and to perhaps have a different perspective.
Certainly. He's also a member of the Economic Program Oversight Committee, and incidentally, we never saw a response from the EPOC as to
that. Okay, maybe they're in agreement with it.
In the recent report.
You will have to write a minority report,
yes,
maybe,
yes,
like we do in the courts. But
right.
But there are others who I would have thought would be, I'm really calling out names, Mrs.
Yes.
Davis White, Mr. Grant, or whoever his successor is on the EPOC. These people must defend the interest groups that they have, which
is really the productive sector and the workers.
Well, indeed, and who do not have the same interests as those who are perhaps in charge of everything that we put aside.
Precisely.
Well, we're going to have to be careful of this. What is the international climate in which all of these local events should be contexted?
Well, again, connectivity. So we are being required to move faster, to grow faster, to become productive. In a global economy where the top economist at the IMF tells us that it is leveling off. So international economy has been growing at the same pace for the last 3 years. And we are required to grow faster in that environment. But in that environment, interest rates are increasing at the same time because the Donald says that he wants to relieve corporate America of their taxes while he wants to spend more on the military at the same time. So America is now running its largest budget deficit in 6 years, and as a result, they are willing to pay higher interest rates, up to 4%, to get the money to finance that deficit. Now, that means that investors, those who hold money for the sake of holding money, some of the people we're talking about, they are going to move their money to the place where they get the highest return.
I have some questions for Finance Minister Clark to ask him what has been the impact on the national debt of the fluctuations of the currency.
Well, we know up to June, the debt increased by $53 billion. And
because of that?
Yes. And
$53 billion.
$53 billion. And the cost of servicing it jumped by $7 billion. That was up to June.
Okay, the debt itself, the capital debt moved by 53
and the cost of servicing
for the year?
Yes.
Okay, and 7 billion more for servicing it, not to pay back anything yet, but just to surface it.
That was up to June.
So we need to ask how we go. I thought we were going in the opposite direction.
Right.
Or rather, we wanted to. And we have to ask ourselves, how are we going to weather the storms that are brewing elsewhere,
Precisely.
but which we seem oblivious to?
Two at this time. We have two important dates coming up, November 4 and November 6. November 4 is the day when Iran is supposed to stop selling the 2 million barrels of oil per day. Now, that is going to have a serious impact on crude prices, which are already climbing. So we want to know how is it that we're going to navigate that environment. Crude is our second largest.
Crude oil makes, allows for the generation of electricity.
Yes, the driving of all those cars that we're talking
and
about.
it also makes for the fabrication of motor fuels of all sorts.
Yes.
So there's a knock-on relationship between the
water commissions, water, the bill is $6 billion per annum.
That's a bill from of electricity to the
Pump
water commission for pumps to give you and I water, which we're very proud.
Right.
Okay, so all of those things have to be covered.
Precisely.
And so we have to ask ourselves, are we being daring enough, advancing enough in terms of the protection of ourselves against these swings? No. We should tell our listeners and viewers that later this morning we'll be interviewing Dr. Michael Taylor, Professor Taylor, who has some important issues to do with climate change. Now, that's critical because energy plays the most important role there.
Right.
Okay, and the progress towards that aspirational 50% of the national energy need, which Prime Minister wants to have renewables, which of course is everybody's ambition. Simply saying something in a breezy fashion doesn't really take us there. We need to know what is the strategy, what are the tactics, what are the costs, and what is required of each one of us. And do we have another 10 years in order to make that switch? Or are we going to be overtaken by events not of our making?
Precisely. And when we look again for the connectivity running, in September, the inflation rate jumped to 1.1%, 4.3% September to September, primarily driven by increases in the prices of water and electricity. And where the Water Commission says, by the way, we want a 23% increase in water rates.
And a 30-something in sewerage, which is unavoidable. No, that's going to be inflationary, won't it? And yet, on the other hand, the Water Commission obviously needs money. I thought they had borrowed sufficiently for their capital works. And I would only be prepared to say to our listeners and viewers, look, let's cheerfully pay that amount from somewhere. If we knew that they were so reorganizing as to run a very efficient operation.
That's the point, because the Water Commission does not collect for 70% of the water. Half of that is stolen, half is wasted. And they have $20 billion on the road for uncollected water. Now, the electricity bill is $60 billion. So we, as you're saying, we need to see plans as to how you are going to reduce the amount of water that you're not collecting for. The plan as to how you are going to collect the $20 billion on the road. The plan to reduce your $6 billion electricity bill before you come to the public for another increase. How is it that the primary schools and high schools are going to pay those water bills?
I wonder, and we'll have to ask that question and be present at the OUI hearings and invite them here, won't we? We try to be vigilant. We try to go to the bottom line, and our business is to seek a better life for each one of us, particularly those who are weakest at the present time. We're not involved in public relations or froth. We're involved in moving Jamaica forward. When we come back after the bottom line, we're going to be joined by Dr. Canute Thompson, head of the Caribbean Center for Education and Planning, and strong media practitioner, commentator. And his piece was interesting. He spoke about Zozo and states of emergency, fairness, and, oh my, favoritism. Stay tuned now. Glad to have you on Power Talk Live on Power 106 and JNN Jamaica News Network. And we're joined by Dr. Canute Thompson, head of the Caribbean Center for Education and Planning at the University of the West Indies. Morning, Doc.
Good morning.
Welcome again.
Thank you.
Yes, happy to have you. Radson, Dr. Thompson's piece in the press this week was entitled ZOZO,
Yes.
Zones of Special Operations, and SOE, that means States of Emergency, Fairness and Favoritism. And he raises an issue, a thought that I wanted to start with. He posits that we need a governance philosophy of fairness. What do you mean by that, Dr. Canute? A governance philosophy of fairness.
Yeah. When the Mount Salem ZOSO was announced, the government argued that Mount Salem selected itself and as such was a logical choice for the first ZOSO. We later discovered that data that were used to inform the decision were flawed.
Yes.
Embarrassing.
Yes.
And embarrassingly so. And if you were to go by that data, which were later established, then Mount Salem would not have been the selected community. The government later explained, I think it was the then head of the National Security Council, or advisor, sorry, National Security Advisor, now Police Commissioner,
yes,
Anderson.
Yes.
He argued that it was really a test case and you couldn't use the most difficult community to prove the concept, and so the narrative began to change as to why Mount Salem was selected. And I observed at the time, as I did yesterday's paper, that it is curious that the adjoining community of Salt Spring, from which mothers had written, or mothers had written to the Minister of National Security,
yes,
appealing to the minister to save their sons, that community would have been perhaps a more logical choice for ZOSO. Or at a minimum, the ZOSO should have been extended to include Salt Spring, which adjoins Mount Salem.
Right.
And I wondered whether the fact that Mount Salem is a PNP stronghold in a JLP constituency might have informed that decision. And the real challenge is that the methodology used to select these communities need to be transparent, should not be subject to the questions that we have about whether government is really trying to pressure some communities and give others a free pass.
So a philosophy of fairness then on the part of government means that the question you would ask yourself whenever any policy is being implemented, any expenditure made, how fair is this? And that answer would have to cut across and be higher than, beyond any considerations of partisanship or religion or race or anything else, but purely on the basis of need and efficiency.
And what the facts are.
Yes.
And I think what this case illustrates is that there were questions as to whether or not the facts were the drivers of the decision. And to reinforce your point, yes, I quoted the British jurist Lord Diplock, who made the point that public officials have a duty to be fair. So fairness is not a
thing of convenience.
A thing of convenience, something you do because you feel like it. You're duty bound as a public official to be fair. And one of the ways in which we can ensure fairness is by being transparent in the processes of decision making. And I'm not sure that we got that in relation to ZOSO. And I was really calling attention to the fact that the Prime Minister has announced that there are now some 20 ZOSOs, or 20 communities that have been targeted.
Yes.
And it was an appeal to the government to make sure that the methodology for the selection of these communities is transparent, that people can be satisfied that it was really the right thing to do by selecting community A or community B.
Okay. Now, in terms of fairness and efficiency in relation to spending, the IDB is contending that we're wasting a whole lot of money in the way we're approaching this thing, because we're spending on the secondary things rather than spending on the primary things, such as the education and training, the housing, the social intervention. What's your take on that?
That's an excellent point. So I might have addressed that matter in that article. In fact, I should, because That piece to which you referred came out the week before,
Right.
where the IDB is basically saying that we're spending on the wrong things.
Wrong things, yes.
And I've argued that that whereas the concept of ZOSO was not required, because the things that we're doing under ZOSO we could have been done with regular policing and social strategy. Whereas that is so.
That should be how the whole nation runs, sir.
Indeed,
Yes.
indeed,
Yes.
indeed.
Yes.
So,
With interests of development and
Yes.
security
Yeah.
going hand in hand.
Yes.
right. So
Not peace.
that notion in that one of the things that I think is also one of the areas in which it has failed is that it has emphasized policing strategies
Right.
which are analogous to, if not the same, as strategies used under the state of emergency. But the ZOSO as conceived, I think this is when you look at the Act, item F in the objects of the Act, it is really to promote social and economic development. You don't need a special policing strategy to promote social and economic development. And indeed, as you've said, Ronnie, it is the fundamental purpose for which government exists.
Yes.
So insofar as the tendency has been that we have been spending heavily on boots and guns and armored cars and other
rather than
paraphernalia
books and
of
computers,
we should be spending on books and computers and housing. So I'm saying, so in a way, the narrative should have been that Mount Salem is lucky because they are getting the support that they require to become a productive community.
Correct.
But what was happening is that we inundated Mount Salem with police, and we gave a couple of guys birth certificates and TRN, but we have not empowered them with skills to start their own businesses.
Can a community be rescued? Can a community, crime-ridden intensely or not, can it become prosperous without more jobs, without people having something useful, profitable, productive to do?
No. I mean,
The economist says no.
Yes.
The leadership coach says no.
Right.
Yeah. But that seems to elude.
Yes.
Elude. This is one of the central. No, not illusion. Delusion.
Yes.
That we labor under in this society.
Yes, yeah. And this is a fundamental point because this administration works closely with the IDB. How
Yes.
could they ignore completely what IDB is saying in order to deal with the problem?
Yeah, well, probably the IDB report is coming late, eh?
Yeah.
And let's hope that in the course of the next year, this is October, so government is now preparing its budget for 1920.
Yeah.
Though the medium-term plan is pretty much set.
Right.
But I hope that with this insight from the IDB, there will be some packaging of the budget. Let's recall that government's medium-term plan, as had been articulated by a number of persons, including the learned Attorney General, was that law and order was the #1 priority going forward.
Yes.
Now law and order conceived of as repressive policing or inundation of communities with law enforcement personnel is a misconstruction of what law and order. Law and order is a product of a productive community and citizen.
Yes.
So look at countries like Singapore and Thailand and Finland. Where whilst you'll always have white collar crime and other antisocial behaviors, as people who are productive are less likely to get involved in criminal activity. So this heavy spend of government, and I'm saying you get this explanation that we don't have the resources. Michael Manley did say that a country will always find the resources to support the things that it regards as important.
Because we hear about 20-story buildings. We have enough money to do those things.
Yes.
So if we have enough money to build 20-story buildings, why is it that we don't have enough money to buy computers and to build houses and to clean the gullies?
It's a question of priorities.
If we have one
precisely
conviction that we want to pass on to our viewers and listeners on this program, and you are addressing it this morning, is that we are not short of money.
No.
We have a trillion, you say, Mr.
In
Hammond?
deposits in the banking system.
In deposits in the banking system.
640 billion in
640 billion in pension.
funds.
We have the dormant funds.
Yes.
45 billion.
45 billion.
And 2 trillion of the securities industry.
So if you are serious about development, and particularly the human development, which is the kernel of what Dr. Thompson is writing about, yes, and the various modalities in which we protect it or don't do so, then using the resources prudentially, radically, that means going to the root, is within our capacity to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's take a practical example. So we have this asset up at Montpelier. This old training facility. I estimate that it would take no more than a couple $100 million to bring that facility up to a state where it can offer a range of skills training to the youngsters in Montego Bay and Westmoreland and Hanover who are involved in it. And that is how you fight crime, by giving people long-term legitimate alternatives.
Correct.
Okay.
And so training is critical.
We have the infrastructure, we have the personnel, and we have the money. What we don't seem to have is a will to make a real revolutionary difference in the order of things that that are in fact killing us. With crime, with antisocial behavior, with broken down families, and with an attitude of a very negative attitude of rugged individualism. So fairness would take us in a different direction. Favoritism is the order of the day. Dr. Knut Thompson joins us after the break. Welcome back to Power Talk Live. We're speaking with Dr. Knut Thompson, head of the Caribbean Center for Education and Planning at the University of West Indies. Dr. Knut, you say if these SOSOs are to promote social and economic development, we need to see substantial resources being made available to A, train and kickstart young entrepreneurs and small businesses. Hear that, Ralston?
Yes.
B, support the establishment of major manufacturing plants. Wonder how. C, provide skills and discipline training for youngsters by the hundreds. Okay? And you have an aside. You say major refurbishing work should by now have commenced at Montpelier and St. James. That's the old dairy factory. And D, radically revise the programs being offered in the schools in the areas. Anything like that happening?
I'm not aware of anything like that happening, and it is unfortunate that a year into Mount Salem, we haven't seen the social and economic investment necessary to really move Mount Salem from being a community, the community it was last year, to something else.
But there was no verve that I sense in the society for that. We are mired in the memory of what previous states of emergencies and similar events have been, and feeling that this is no better no day. This is what you do. Is that the sum of the crime plan?
I would hate to think so, and I believe that an important starting point is for the leadership of the government to articulate a bold vision of what it believes is possible for these communities that have been declared and are to be declared zones of special operation. Incidentally, the Act stipulates that the entire country may not be declared a zone of special operation, which I thought is a little bit ridiculous, but because insofar as ZOSO is in part intended to contain crime, but more importantly, I think, promote social and economic development, that should be on the entire landscape. But let me speak to two things in respect of those areas. Is it a question I have asked that there is an insufficient attention being paid by the advisors to the government and those who shape policy with respect to the philosophical constructs that must inform how we build a society.
What name so?
Yeah, cool. You're not interested in that kind of stuff. Yes.
You cannot transform a society by treating with the fruits of your social problems, the manifestations. You really have to go to the root causes. To use a term you used earlier, the radical interventions.
So the really radical starting point for me is an assertion, a philosophical assertion that human life, and let's particularize it, the human life of Jamaicans, is a precious divine gift, which is, if anything could be beyond its divinity, it is its upliftment and its sustenance is the absolute cornerstone of any 20-story building.
Yes, certainly. Certainly.
Now, if you say that, then you might postpone the 20th story. You might not go beyond 3 or 4. But you would do such a plethora of other things. That you would then be able to better understand the need to go up or down or sideways. And probably you wouldn't go up.
So it becomes
just that one thing alone, you know.
It becomes a question of what do we regard as the true indicators of our growth, of our transformation, and of our development. And there's a notion in leadership, in politics and governance, that if you're able to create sufficient, might I say, collateral and material and anecdotes that point to development, then you will lead people to believe that development is taking place. So they look at the 20th. You look at the 20th.
But that's Jim Jones.
Indeed.
That was his.
But when you drill down on it, the quality of life of the people who work in these buildings has not improved. So it comes back to the question of what are the foundational principles on which your development philosophy is based. All right.
Well, if your foundational philosophy is on the sanctity of and the potential of human existence, then it seems to me you will not be able to detain 2,000 people in the first 10 days of the Kingston SOE and then let most of them out.
No, well, we saw some frightening statistics on
Saturday.
Yes. 11,000 detained, 400 charged.
3.6%.
Yes, okay. And when you look at the rate of trial and conviction, of course, it becomes more meaningful, more minuscule.
But here's a question that arises, if I might, though. So 400 charged. I think this actually, it was 11,005 detained. But even if it's 11,000, over 10,000 youngsters have been taken in, treated as animals, subject to the conditions of I mean, it could be your son coming from church, you know, or from school.
It is he. And then people should understand the consequences. Yes, that when you write your name right down and you go to the embassy and ask for a visa, and they say, "Have you ever been arrested?" You can answer no. You know.
No.
Okay. And this is going to be an issue, or can be an issue, with all of the digitization and national identification, all of these things. These things, you carry them like a duppy through the whole of your life.
Indeed.
And you, apart from which, you undermine the fundamentals of the Constitution, which say that even in the most worst circumstances of civil strife and the justified state of emergency, you can't scrape up anybody unless you have a reasonable cause of suspicion. And when you do those 11,000, what it means is that your reasonable source of suspicion is because they are poor, young, and black.
And let's come from that.
Which goes right to your conception, your philosophical premise of what human life is all about.
And we have been a little coy to talk about the issue of racism. All right. Lest we get distracted. Racism is not does not arise in relation to North American societies. We have racism very strong here. I mean, I recall that a youngster was walking on East King's House Road, brandishing a gun, and nothing went wrong.
Right.
If that were a black youngster,
Yes.
They're dead.
he would be dead long time.
Yeah.
So, I guarantee you, I need not see the faces of the youngsters, but I am absolutely sure that the vast majority of those 11,000 youngsters were black youngsters. All right. And
by the way, it doesn't mean
Yeah.
that in fairness of oppression,
Yes.
that people of every race should suffer the same thing.
no.
It means that
it's wrong.
nobody.
Yeah, nobody.
Without
Indeed.
reasonable suspicion, and that racial profile or
Yes.
class profile
Yes.
is against the law.
Yes.
It breaches the Constitution, and it is morally foul.
Indeed. But let me just wonder with you, though, gentlemen. Think about those youngsters now. The resentment they feel towards the state.
Yes.
The scars they carry forward.
Yes.
All right? But more importantly, the fact that in their navigation now of the social and economic space in which you operate, they have this thing on their record,
Yes.
which could undermine their prospect
Yes.
of getting a job, of migrating, and of moving on with their lives.
So the fact that enemies of the state.
So the fact that they have been released
Yes.
is not the end of the matter, is the start
Yes.
of their misery.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So we need. This is quite a session. What this means is that we have to look very carefully and think through some of the things that we're doing. And it means, and you have to tell me how you're going to do this, Dr. Canute. How do you draw a people with all of their concerns and diversions towards a philosophy of fairness? Because it's only if it rises from ordinary people that it's likely to become an article of government.
Yeah.
Don't expect it to come from the other direction.
Indeed. I think one of the places at which we must start is by telling the stories of the people whose lives have been affected by the acts of unfairness of the state and by the rest of us. Because in our interactions we also can be unfair to people. We need to confront those painful stories of those youngsters and other people in society who, by virtue of not having either the right color, being in the right party, or being from the right class, are denied an opportunity. So it requires that we come back to the foundational affirmation that each of us as citizens of this country has a right to be treated with equality by the state and using the resources of the state. I cited the case of the youngster whose life would have been affected by virtue of problems at at Victoria Jubilee. And this youngster his family was visited by the Prime Minister and offered support. All right, very well, good. But what about the other youngsters, the other families who would have been subject to similar mishap and misfortune? Right. Is there not a duty on the state to use the resources, both the political resources and the financial resources, in a way that advances the interests of every Jamaican?
Dr. Canute Thompson, thanks for troubling our conscience. Yes, that's the important thing you've done today. Thanks for writing, and I hope you'll continue along this theme.
I'll try.
Dr. Canute Thompson writes about Zozo and the states of emergency, fairness and favoritism. He is the public affairs commentator and head of the Caribbean Center for Education Planning at the University of the West Indies. We'll soon come back. Welcome back to Power Talk Live on Power 106 FM and Jnn Jamaica News Network. We're joined by Professor Michael Taylor, Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology at UWI and Director of the Climate Studies Group at MONA. We don't have any skepticism about the fact of climate change. It is the extent of it, it is the remedies about it that we really need to talk with Professor Taylor about. Morning, Prof.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm referring to the United Nations Secretary General's statement of the 8th of October this year. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its long-awaited special report on global warming, warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And he says it's an air-splitting wake-up call to the world. It confirms that climate change is running faster than we are and that we're running out of time. Does this have a relevance for us?
Absolutely. In fact, this particular report is very significant for the Caribbean region. Significant in many ways. One, just in terms of what it says about climate change. And, you know, we can pick up some of the things that this particular report says about climate change. But I don't know if you think back, you know, a couple years and remember that the Caribbean had been an advocate for 1.5 degrees or 1.5 degrees. In fact, the Caribbean launched this global slogan, 1.5 to stay alive. Okay. And the argument was, we have seen 1 degree of warming to date. We can only see 0.5 degree more warming by the end of the century if places like the Caribbean are to remain viable places for existence. And this was a little bit in contrast to where the rest of the world was heading, because the rest of the world signed on to the Paris Agreement. Right. And the Paris Agreement is really what we call a 2-degree agreement, which said, okay, we have seen 1, we probably as a world can live with 1 more degree by the end of the century. But the Caribbean said absolutely no way, and they pushed and pushed so much that the IPCC decided to do this special report on 1.5. So in just the significance of the report, that the Caribbean region got the world to react to 1.5 degrees and produce this report.
Well, that's very good, but step back a minute for our listeners and viewers. What is the significance of this 1 degree? Sorry to be basic, but what is global warming and why is it worrying us?
Absolutely. All right, so when we talk about climate change, we talk about things like how much the world has warmed, for example. So climate change is long-term changes in measures of climate. The chief measure of climate that we would think about is temperatures, and that's why global warming. And if we look on pre-industrial times to present, so about the last 100 years, the world has warmed on average by 1 degree. Now, look in the Caribbean region on what that 1 degree has done. Certainly within our Caribbean region, we kind of see some particular manifestations of climate change. 1, hotter. I think there's nobody in, in Jamaica, the region.
Things have got hotter.
You know, things have gotten hotter. Hotter in terms of just how hot you feel, hotter in terms of the number of consecutive days that are hot, and then hotter in the nights as well. The nighttime temperatures are particularly key. So that's what the 1 degree has seen. So we have seen summer starting earlier, summer lasting longer, summer reaching some hotter temperatures. The 1 degree has also meant that we have seen extreme variability in our rainfall patterns. All right, so, you know, since 2000 alone, we have had 2 region-wide droughts, which have lasted a year or more. You know, we can remember back to 2013, 2016. And then if we even think of this year, the beginning of this year, for the first couple of months were really dry. But you get this variability. You also get this variability in how rain falls. So you get these long periods of dry, and then when you get rain, you get rain. That's Trinidad.
Oh, yes, man.
That's exactly. So that's the 1 degree. The 1 degree is also the rising sea levels that we have seen, and I don't need to call the names for your Hell Show, Little Ochi, Big Rail, and then of course the intense storms. So that's what 1 degree that we have seen already has brought for us in the Caribbean region. And the Caribbean has said, listen, if that's what 1 degree has brought, we cannot see more than 0.5 degree more. Whereas the world was saying, no, we can at least go on to 2 degrees. But the Caribbean advocated, listen, there's a difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees. So the report that the UN Secretary General was referring to is actually the result of Caribbean advocacy.
Michael, fix your microphone.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, we need to put it on? Okay, well, we'll do so in a minute. Yes. Many Jamaicans aren't fully appreciating of the extent of this to us. We think of it as being somebody else's problem because we don't really know what we could do about it. And what I'm anxious for Professor Taylor to be able to tell us is whether it is a personal responsibility, whether there are things that we could do better, differently, individually, and as a community. What, for example, is our deep engagement with fossil fuels meaning to all of this? And if we're going to aspire towards renewable energy, how are we going to store it? Big questions as we continue with Power Talk Live. Prof, you were saying.
Right. So where I was saying, you know, this report is very significant for us because it makes a clear case that 1.5 degrees is perhaps a limit, you know, and there is a significant difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees.
Where are we heading? Where's the world heading?
Boy, if we do nothing, we are heading for 3.5 to 4 degrees.
For this century?
For this century. If we follow what we committed to, all the countries in the world under the Paris Agreement, we're heading to 2.5 degrees. Right. So we're not even heading for 2 degrees, you know.
We're bursting that one. So much less than 1.5, which will ensure our survival.
Less. But this report says, listen, 1.5 is important. You know,
but Donald, the President of the Republic of the United States, says this is all a hoax. You guys are bad actors. You're Democrats who are trying to prevent big oil from making money.
I want you to listen carefully to his statements in the last 2 weeks, and some of the chief Republicans. You know, I listened with very keen interest to Ted Cruz the other day being interviewed.
What do you say?
And
are they shifting?
I think climate is making its case for them. So the fact that they had these hurricanes that have come, and the head of FEMA has said, boy, the problem they're having is the repeated hurricanes. They're not seemingly disputing now that there is a change in climate. Where they are disputing is who or what is causing the change in climate.
So it's man-made.
So the concept is that, you know, you can't take responsibility for it by saying greenhouse gases are responsible for the climate change. But they are suggesting adaptation, that we must adapt to the changing climate. So you want to listen to the slight shifts, shifts that are taking place. Because I think everybody world over, including in the Caribbean region, can see.
It's clear for all to see.
For us in the region, it's important because of the impacts that are being felt. Now, in the Caribbean region, the impacts are across the board. It's standard of living, it's quality of life. We're talking about your food supply, we're talking about your water, we're talking about your energy, we're talking about your basic comfort.
Well, hold on, I just don't know. We've been celebrating a new tourism resort area. We have more to come. Radson will tell you the huge impact that has on employment, on GDP. We all see it. But and we are not as dependent on tourism as some other parts of the Caribbean region. So I wonder how these people understand what you are telling us, and which is ineluctable in its veracity from the United Nations, etc. Yes, it's not some wild thing anymore. And yet they still go on with these investments that put rooms in the sea.
And the tourism is particularly susceptible on many fronts. You talk about the coastal infrastructure. So coastal infrastructure right away is their susceptibility.
Suppose what has happened at Hellshire were to happen in Montego Bay or Ocho Rios. You realize that you're going with billions of dollars in Oraston.
And livelihoods.
And livelihoods.
And the livelihoods that are supported by it. But they're also, you know, so susceptible to the water. Where do they get the water from? Our water is so heavily based on rainfall. You know, the energy demand, their workers have to work outdoors. You know, you can begin to see the food that they supply. You can see the multiple ways in which climate interacts with. So the question is, how is the industry really beginning to factor climate change in a holistic manner?
There was a conference, I believe, recently, which maybe you know more about, that we can talk about. But when we come back from the break, the real question for Professor Michael Taylor is, what are we going to do about it? What can we do? And where do we get the clout? Where do we get the will? We're talking about climate change, its effect on our lives, your life. Stay tuned, we soon come. Where else but on Power Talk Live do you think you're going to get the depth and the breadth of discussion on issues crucial as climate change? Professor Michael Taylor of the university is with us. So, sir, should we all begin to say our prayers and throw up our hands? Is there something we can do, or is this big country business?
No, man. There are actions on many levels, you know. In the first place, the kind of action that you often hear about, especially for us in the Caribbean region, is we talk adaptation. So notice even the 1.5 degrees is kind of a giving in to the fact that, boy, we're going to have climate change. We have committed ourselves. You know, we're just trying to limit what it is. And so adaptation is needed by all of us, from individual levels going right up to the government. So we're talking about hotter climates, you know. So how we're going to live with these hotter climates, we need to begin to look at our cooling systems. We need to look at it individually, how we build our
architects must be important.
So the building policy now plays a key. Right? You know, we're about to build a whole new parliament building, if I can go there. Has that been factored in, you know, into the whole design? But the whole building policy, you know. So adaptation, and you can take adaptation right across, you know, to the agricultural sector. You know, where they're going to get water from and get reliable water in this variable kind of regime.
What kind of crops should be planted?
What kind of crops that are. So adaptation becomes critical, and adaptation from the individual level going right all the way through government. The second thing then is what we call mitigation. Mitigation in the climate change world is, how do you reduce the thing that is causing the problem? So we are advocating 1.5 degrees. Well, it means we're going to have to do something to enable us to only reach 1.5 degrees. We have to reduce the greenhouse gases. Therein for us in the region, that's renewable energy. Looking on where we're getting our energy from. Because every renewable energy source is less greenhouse gases that you're putting out in the atmosphere. And again, you run the individual right up to the government level. Mitigation for us is also not just energy, it's also preservation of forestry. You know, forestry, every tree pulls greenhouse gases. So it's green spaces, you know, that we preserve and not replace by...
You know what's coming across is the exquisite connectivity of all different sectors. This is something that you always say.
Agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, everything that
and
we can talk about.
This is where...
Transportation,
And this is where we throw around the phrase joined up government, but this is where joined up government becomes important, you know, because of the connectivity of the impact. You can't deal with water and not deal with agriculture, not deal with tourism, you know, not deal with community, not deal with, you know. So the mitigation is, you know, as I was saying, it's the energy, it's the forestry, it's the waste.
It's a waste?
Waste. But everything you recycle is energy you don't use to make. You know, it's how we deal with waste. You know, so that's part of the mitigation. It's the transport sector is mitigation. You know. So you can see the ways in which we really climate change is this multi-pronged thing that really connects across life.
So governments have to be joined up to deal with this problem.
We have to look at it holistically.
So frame the discussion going forward for me. I want to ask you if we have a plan, but before we can have a plan, we have to have a consciousness.
The consciousness.
No, I'm aware that in the last few months, natural events and perhaps more than 3 months, are making this more of a popular topic. The UN report itself has provoked a discussion like this, and I'm sure more.
The granting of the Nobel Prize.
Yes, I forgot that. Yes, who have worked on this. No, all of that is good, but it strikes me that we have to fashion a prominent narrative, a sustainable conversation going forward. And we have to depend upon people like you to help us.
Right, you know, and the narrative is, for us especially in the region, climate is linked to our quality of life. The kind of life that you and I live, or the average person lives, is really bound up in climate. And so we have to really take the changes in climate as serious. One of the little problems I have, or the little things, is that we we consider climate when we have major disaster events. So we have a Trinidad, and so climate becomes topical. Or we had the 3 Category 5 storms of last year. But climate is unrelenting in its gradual change, you know. The warming temperatures, we almost take them for granted, and what you do is just add more capacity to cool, you know, and you forget that the drought, that is a slow onset. It's 2 months before you notice that we're in a drought. You know, but we have to begin to think of climate in that context. So it's not just funds to deal with recovery from a natural disaster. It's now planning for the various manifestations and forms, the slow onset climate as well as the unpredictable, unprecedented climate. You know, and that's where I think we talk climate because the climate is making a case in terms of the disastrous nature, but we haven't begun to really look at how we deal with it in a holistic, long-term manner.
Okay.
And also from a sectoral standpoint, Ronnie, the insurance side of the financial sector.
Yes.
All of those reinsurance rates and all of those things from Swiss Re.
It's upon us, Munich and Swiss. And we're not counting that as being another cost.
That's another.
Yes. No, so what would be the priorities? If as we close, are there 2 or 3 priorities that we want to communicate to our listeners and viewers and just have them work on them?
Well, I always say the priority areas, well, I mentioned the adaptation. So adaptation has to be critical. Begin to look on how climate is impacting you and the most vulnerable, and begin to figure out how we're going to adapt because we're going to have climate change. So adaptation in your sphere, whether it's an individual, a community, going right up, has to be the priority. If you want me to single out a sector, a couple of sectors, water becomes, I think, one of the priority areas. We must pay attention. We need what I would call increased capacity. Where we're going to get the water from. In a hotter world with variability, does that mean capturing water off of roofs when it's there, community ponding, transporting water from where it's available to, the energy suffers from that. You need increased capacity as well.
Which comes us to the building industry again, Ronnie. Because we'll have to be looking at things like those when we're talking about building new schemes. Where's the water going
Absolutely.
to come from?
Yeah, and frankly, I would rather have a new reservoir than a 20-story building.
Precisely.
So the kind of decisions we make with the limited resources we have, water has to be a priority.
We usually take, when we posit the 20-story building, and we're not really belaboring that, it presumes a lot of things which you are telling us, Professor Taylor, that we can no longer presume.
We can't, this is what I am trying to say.
That there's going to be endless amounts of water, light, sewage opportunities, or we can go on dumping the thing the way we used to, and have energy and have no consciousness about it.
Yes.
Wow. So water is a critical one.
Water is a critical one. The energy sector is a critical one. Health is one that we often we don't look, because health is also directly linked to productivity. If you have a healthy workforce, but you're talking about the emergence of things like Zika and chikungunya, which have the ability to thrive in this kind of thing. You're talking about asthma and heat waves and those kind of things. I think the health sector is not one that we look at, especially for the long-term changes. Health is directly impacted by disastrous events, and we need to do that. The whole disaster, arena, preparedness, those kinds of.
Are there any good best practices? Are there countries that perhaps are alongside us or ahead of us in making some plans that you in your unit are looking at and can say, we might do something like this? Because it almost seems to me we need a working group on climate adaptation, mitigation, that is constantly in the public eye, and which is saying, hey, this needs, when we sit down to make the budget, that we are saying, okay, now this is a new factor.
Well, let me plug two. I mean, we have a climate change division, which is in my opinion, very understaffed. There's some very good people in there trying to do some good work. But the kind of level of staffing, to me, does not suggest the importance that or the processes. So, for example, You talk about the budget, you know, is that budget climate proofed in any given year? Who is the expert who looks on it to climate proof the plans? You talk about the long-term planning. I don't know, you know, I'm just saying. You know, we have a great unit in the Planning Institute of Jamaica called the Sustainable Development Unit. You know, again, you know, what's the role that we give to them in terms? So we, you know, the kind of prominence and resources that we give to this will tell our attitude.
How can you help? What's the work of where does the work of the climate studies group intersect with public policy?
Well, certainly what we are doing is trying to do the research to support, you know, to ensure that the adaptation that we put in place is not maladaptation, it's not an imported solution that we pull from somewhere, that the boundaries in which we are trying to adapt are realistic boundaries. So we try to do that. We try to be the research arm for some of the government entities.
So it's local bound. Your work,
our work is
locally related.
It's very much
that
locally
is
related.
Yes.
Right. You know, and I throw in that research needs lots more support. You know, so it is very local, very regionally based as well. So we do the science of Caribbean and Jamaican climate. You know, and it's within that context.
That's important, you know, what was Rex's remarkable phrase? Outward stretch, inward reach. Yes.
It in fact therefore gives our negotiators the ammunition they need
this is it.
To do the 1.5.
And I'm so proud to hear that we led in that regard.
We did, you know.
But then now we have to make sure that message is internalized.
It has to be. We also have to take that report and break it down again for our policymakers and for negotiators, you know, so that they use it, you know, on the international scene to say, there are limits to adaptation, for example, and there are things like the Green Climate Fund, which we must, you know, make use of, you know, and it's research that is going to guide you along in those ways.
And there has to be, you have to help us too with the weighting of responses. You know, which comes first? Is it emphasis on renewable energy, or is it forestation and water, which is connected with which most integrally?
Right. And looking on the vulnerabilities, you know, who, you know, I often say one of the things we're not paying attention to is what I call the new climate vulnerable. Certainly the poor are amongst you know, we can warm by 0.5 degree more and we get hotter days, but a hotter day to me and you is not a hotter day to somebody else.
Somebody in absolutely confined circumstances.
In confined, you know, children, you know, people with certain diseases, elderly.
Affects the receptivity of education.
Education.
Schools or institutions.
Outdoor workers, don't forget them, you know, your security guard, you know, there's a whole new set of what I call the climate vulnerable who are emerging, who we're not paying attention to.
What a huge epiphany of understanding of consciousness necessary for your life and for the nation that Professor Michael Taylor offers today. You can't take it light, you know. This is a serious business. We're going to have to keep this center focus, not with a situation of pessimism.
No,
it can change. We can do better.
We can do things. We certainly, you know, can do things.
And we must do things.
And must.
Yeah.
Professor Michael Taylor, Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology at UWI, Director of the Climate Studies Unit at Mona. Thank you so much. We have to do other chapters of this as we go as we go ahead. Power Talk returns when we do. A related man, Chairman of the Parliament's Public Administration and Appropriations Committee and Opposition Spokesman on Tourism, Honorable Dr. Wickham McNeil joins us. We're going to ask him how the tourist industry under his watch and under this watch is adapting to climate change. Stay with us. Welcome back to Power Talk on Power 106 Live and on Jamaica News Network, JNN. We join radio and television to give you the best coverage of the things that can make a difference in your life as Jamaicans and can move the country forward. We're now joined by Chairman of Parliament's Public Administration and Appropriations Committee and Opposition Spokesman on Tourism, Dr. Wickham McNeil. Greetings, Wickham. Morning.
Yeah, morning.
Thanks for coming.
Yes.
Good. Wanted to link you first and connect you with what we were just talking with Prof. Michael Taylor about climate change and the imminent impact on the tourist industry. I would have thought that the tourist industry will be watching what the climate unit is doing at UWI very, very closely. I believe there was a conference recently about the impact of climate change on Jamaican tourism, if I'm right. But they ought to be funding, and they ought to be, I don't want to say frightened, but certainly apprehensive of building right on the shorefront. Suppose we come back, Neil, what has happened at Helshaw or Little Ochi were to happen in Negril, where you're from.
Well, we have had similar situations in Negril.
Really?
Although it comes and it goes, so we're in a period now where it has gone out, but chances are when we have the next westerly, it will come in. And it is happening in other places. I was down in Little Ochi the other day, just talking with them. The beach has come right in. So this is something all over the world that persons are watching. Part of the whole discussion now is really not just about tourism, but about sustainable tourism and how you go about it. And from as far back as 2000, when we did the master plan for sustainable development, a lot of it was dedicated to the environment and to how we can get a sustainable tourism going forward. And a lot of it goes to the planning that goes into place in building your developments, how you look at it, the managing of the properties. You know, the last person who was here from the EU in Jamaica was very passionate about, in Europe, they're using a lot of the products that they use are very environmentally friendly. You know, they're a bit more expensive, but
yes.
You think about a large lobby of a hotel beside the sea, and they decide after or restaurant lobby, they're going to clean up in the morning or the evening, and they use soap and so forth, and they clean, and then when they finish, they sweep it out. It goes into the sand, sinks in. So it's about moving towards using far more environmentally friendly things. Now, the problem with these products is twofold. One, tend to be more expensive, but number two, they don't sod as much. So it gives you the impression that it's not as, you know, people like to see sod. So the point I'm making is that it's a process. You will never be perfect, but there is a lot of discussion. I think now with the discussions taking place with plastics is going to be critical. You consider how much straws or just plastic things are used in properties. You take away that, it's going to make the difference, but I think we're going in the right direction with that concern.
Well, I hope so, because the impression I have, without knowing too much, is that our industry is vulnerable in respect of the rapidity and the inexorability of climate change. So we really have to think how we adapt, don't we?
Yeah, no.
And how we retrofit.
Just as an interesting thing, look, one of the biggest cruise destinations in the world is Alaska, the Alaskan tourists.
Sure.
It appears that these are getting shorter and shorter because with the warming, there are periods of time where you don't have the cruises. I think it's past October, back to some period. But now, because of these things, you find that it changes.
Sure.
Because now the climate is changing. So over a period of time, but what would have obtained 10, 20 years ago, it changes. So it is absolutely something that we must be cognizant of. You know, it's a very slow moving thing, but what happened for us is going to be different for our children and for the next generation.
Still on tourism, one of the themes that we have on this program daily is to look at how important that industry is to Jamaican development, but how disappointing the levels of retention are. And we find ourselves constrained to point out that while we all hope for 6 million visitors, as the Prime Minister posits, how much of that money is really staying here?
Different figures. The latest estimation, maybe 30%. Well, it could be less, it could be marginally more. What we do know is it's not enough. The fact of the matter is that
it's deceitful to state the gross without having an assessment of the net, sir.
Absolutely.
It gives people the wrong impression.
Absolutely.
Yes, it brings a complacency.
So when you hear that you have earned $2.6 billion.
Yes.
You're like, wow. But the fact of the matter is the retention from that is
$450 million.
yeah, and quite frankly, the biggest benefit, tourism, if you look at it, there are different benefits, if we may put it that way. You have the construction of the properties where you're going to do that. Then you have the actual running of the property. Now, in both phases, an important part of it is the employment. So one of the things that we must do as a government, and to some extent, both have been guilty of this over years, but certainly during my tenure, it was a period where I changed the thought process from just bringing visitors to having an environmental impact. And I think the first thing we have to look at is ensure that the employment they get benefits themselves, because that's how you're really going to get the effect of it on the country. So
is there a pension scheme for tourism workers in place?
We
I know
still
you
don't
did
have
the
one.
initial work.
What
is holding it up?
I'm very concerned about it. I'm very upset about it. I actually was this morning writing something on it because I'm very concerned. Look, this was a process. In all the time, we have had, everybody has spoken about pensions. We've had that discussion over and over. And even in the period prior to 2012, there was discussion about going out and marketing and bringing in companies. Let's push a pension scheme. When I came in the first year, I said, let me do an analysis. Why is it nobody's interested in the pension? When I looked at it, something jumped out at me rapidly. The fact of the matter is that the benefit of a pension scheme is that the tax benefit you get from the savings. But the problem is, so many of the workers are earning, I wouldn't say minimum wage, but thereabouts, that they already get the benefits without having a pension scheme because they fall below the threshold. So basically, no one was taking up the pension scheme because you're really only saying have a long-term investment rather than short-term. So I determined that the only way you could really make this happen is to have a contributory pension scheme where both the employees and the employers. Now, of course, employers were not necessarily jumping at that opportunity. So it took me a year and a half of discussion with the GHTA, etc. And we came to an agreement in 2014, 2015. I actually announced it in 2014. And that now was the basis for it. The second problem we have is that our law doesn't allow for that type of scheme, because what happens when you move from one property to the other, because of the dedicated schemes. So what happened was that we put a committee in place with Daisy Coke chairing it, and what we did was to move it. And we were to have started that pension scheme, launched it in 2017, January. This January will be 2 years overdue. It hasn't happened. I've called out on it. There are consultations taking place, but in my mind, a lot of those consultations are really, not that they're too slow, but they are really almost a diversion. We have to have consultations, but these have been going on for a long time. What we need is to get the legislation in place, launch it. The funds were dedicated from the Tourism Enhancement Fund, and just move on with it. This is important. You can't have people working in the industry and they after 30, 40, 50 years retire and don't have anything to depend on.
I want to ask you before we break, what in your mind can be done to improve the retention in the tourist industry? Are there a couple of quick fixes, if not even quick fixes, things that are going to make a big difference? We need, Dominican Republic, I'm reading the minister says, is revenue of 50 cents on each dollar and foreign exchange retained. Yes, we need that and more, given the chronic shortage of external earnings. What can be done?
All right.
Is it agriculture? Is it services? Is it
it's all of the above. Look, there's really two elements. Element one is a critical mass. So once you got to 20,000 rooms and 25, 30, what you see happening with the investment we have attracted we now have a critical mass. You have enough base here to make a living, for Jamaica to really benefit. Before there was everything you're importing. Now a manufacturer can manufacture for Jamaica and you have you're able to. So the second thing now is you have to put in place that it happens.
Right.
Now that's where government comes in, because government plays a planning and coordinating role. That's why I set up the Tourism Linkages Hub. It has been in place, it has done some good work, but I do not feel that we have done enough and been as targeted as we should. And I'll tell you what I mean. For example, let us say we need strawberries. If you need strawberries for Jamaica, you say, go and do the plans. How many do we need? You need 1,000 tons. I don't know what it is. Then you determine what's the timeline for that, because you don't want to produce 10,000 tons in March. Yes. And then in October we have nothing. Right. How do you? Now there's a planning. Then you go to your farmers and say, I'm going to make a link with these properties and say to them, will you sign a contract maybe for 70%? Let's go somewhere, let's start somewhere. Now the third part is where the critical part comes in. A lot of your farmers and manufacturers, because we relate this to others, now are going to need credit. They're going to need money at interest rate that make, that's where your EXIM and DBJs come in.
Well,
target it and even as a government say, let's find a way to send 1-2%, let's get it down there, because it's in the country's interest. Put it out there and start the process. Now you do that. So let's move now to towels. So what you really want is, you'll never be able to make towels like China. China or US or whoever it is going to have cheaper toys. However, let us say that you now get somebody with the cheap money and the plan and the deals to set up a printing thing, so that I know that whether it is sandals or couples or many or whatever, I have my printing machines. I can import into a big storeroom 5-6 types of towels. So because not everybody is going different.
No, the same thing. And I'm understanding you better.
So it's what government must do is coordinate.
And I'm sorry, I don't see that being done yet. When we come back for the break now, we have to use your time about this Public Administration and Accountability Committee. Yes, how does that work? Why are you involved? Are we getting anywhere? Is somebody trying to call it the game? Dr. Wickham McNeil is our guest. We soon come back on Power Talk Live. Dr. Wickham McNeil is our guest, and he's chairman of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of Parliament. Undoubtedly, Ras, and this has been one of the more active and effective committees. If the
you have also been one of the more active chairman.
Indeed, to his credit. If the PAAC hadn't been active, hadn't been doing its work, then that whole issue with Petroscam and everything following, not yet tied up conclusively, would never have come to the fore. But I gather we come in that you're under pressure. People feel that you shouldn't be allowed a free rein to decide what you want to investigate. You have defenders, notably former Prime Minister Bruce Golding. How does the committee work? Do you feel that your efficiency is being compromised?
Yes, I do. I think over the last month, last 2 months in particular, but I could go back to the start of this parliamentary year. We have seen a change. Early this year, there was a reluctance by the then acting head of the House, who was acting Warmington, Minister Warmington was there, to name the chairmen, who are by convention the opposition chairman of this sessional committees for a period of time. It wasn't until after the budget debate when the PAAC had to now vote on the budget,
by law.
the PAAC, by law,
had to be.
That the PAAC was convened. And then it wasn't until maybe a month or two ago that, or maybe a little before, that the other sessional chairman came in. Now, just one of the things that just baffles me, we all talk about good governance. We all talk about openness and transparency. I mean, I think every prime minister I've seen inducted in their opening speech speaks about, I'm going to bring a new and different type of governance and openness. But it can't just be words. And the truth of the matter is everyone knows that you can't govern yourself. It's nature that in itself is a problem. So you have these committees which have been set up from 2007. Bruce Golding made some changes to the committees and it came into place. And you have had that period, then the period 2012 to 16, or 11 to 16, when the PNP was in power and the JLP chaired the committees, and now we're back again. And only in the last 2 years you have seen this growing resentment to it. Now, the resentment has come about because largely the PAAC has gone in and uncovered some things that are, in my estimation, wrong. The bushing program, that 600 million bushing program was bad. Last year, December, we went into the used car, police used cars, 200 used cars, which we have gotten 30-something to date. We uncovered that. It has been a series of issues going on, which culminated in Petrojam, then Nessal, Universal Service Fund, etc. Now, I found former Prime Minister Golding's letter very, very insightful, and he said something that is so true. You know, what is happening here, they're trying to shoot the messenger. The problem is not the committee. The committee is doing its work. We are defending the people of Jamaica. We're providing oversight and insisting on good government. But what they're doing, and what former Prime Minister Golding said, is what they have to do is clean up their own mess. You should never have had the problems you had in Petrojam, Nessal, Ministry of National Security, etc., etc. So the point is, the committee is more than ever necessary. And it's necessary not just now, it's necessary for both governments, whoever's in power, because it's all about good governance and transparency. So I'm just concerned that you can talk about it on one stage and then try and do everything possible to constrain it.
Is it an instrument of PNP propaganda against labor rights?
Well, how do you do that? For example, look, the PNP never bought any tickets for the chairman of Petrojam. That was done by the Petrojam functionaries. They never built the wall in Petrojam. In Nessal, nobody hired a company with a verbal contract. I mean, that is just preposterous. Now, the question is, the PNP didn't propagandize that. It happened. The job of the committee is to make sure it doesn't happen. So then why do you complain that it doesn't happen? What you must do as a prime minister and minister is ensure that under your watch, your government doesn't allow it to happen. But do you should never allow it to come to a PAAC.
Do you accept that the day will come, no doubt, that when the political tendency that you represent becomes the government, and you realize that a PAAC headed by whoever, the Green loves to remind us how efficient the Public Accounts Committee was, another one on the Audley show, it can bite you, it can become very uncomfortable. Don't you see that that's exactly what's happening at present? Are you prepared to see this across the board, to see this as a principle of checks and balances in government?
More than prepared, and I'll tell you why, because I am convinced. We're not, look, I'm in politics because I think that I can make a difference, and I think many of us are. And we must be true to that promise. And at the end of the day, if we make mistakes, we must be held accountable for them. And sometimes it is the surety of that happening. It is you having a PAAC in place that stops a lot of persons. I'm not talking politicians, I'm talking within the entire government structure, from doing things that they shouldn't do. Now you take that off. if this is happening with a PMP, with a PAAC in place, can you imagine what would happen if you now take the PAC out of the equation? Yeah. It would just become rampant. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just saying to you, as far as I'm concerned, we certainly, under the former government of which I was a part, the PAAC was a very active role, and certainly, and certainly there were times then when I would be in touch with them, because I always believe that we must strive as a people to make a better government.
Do the members of the governing party and the PAAC?
Sorry, not yes. to cut you, but for that, let us start by commending Bruce Golding,
yes,
because as Prime Minister, he strengthened the PAAC. So he must be commended for that. Now, what do you say about somebody
who is trying to reverse that?
Government is trying to reverse that?
What's your next move to maintain the integrity, the freedom of the committee? Why don't you move for the changing of the standing orders that seem to want to limit what you can investigate?
Absolutely. At the last meeting of the committee, when this came to a head, we determined that we are going to refer.
Yeah, I think
the standing orders committee needs to be convened. It's convened under the chairman, under the speaker. There are two elements you need to look at. One is the actual entrenching of opposition being chairman of these committees, and two, how that functions. And I just say to you, I go back to what I said. Nobody in government who is handling public funds should have any fear of transparency and openness. Agreed. There should be no question that you are going to ask that should not be answered. It is not your own money. So the bottom line is, I am just convinced that we must lay the case, because all well-thinking Jamaicans will believe that, and I'm seeing overwhelming support towards it.
Dr. Wickham McNeil, Chairman of Parliament's Public Administration Appropriations Committee, defending our interests in that committee. Whichever government it is, whoever is the chairman, he is at the present time. And the opposition spokesman on tourism, a fascinating interview as we end Power Talk Live for today. Special thanks for our guests, to my co-host Ralston Hammond, and also to you, our listeners and viewers on Power 106 and JNN, and also our editorial and production teams. Do join us again next time when we get to the heart of things and discuss those issues that affect you and the well-being of our country. Do remember also that Power Talk continues on Power 106 after the midday observances. Until next time, Ronald Thwaites and Ralston Hammond signing out.
Living in the positive, and I know good will conquer evil. Living in the positive, oh children, let not your hearts be troubled. Wipe away your tears and fears, 'cause I know love will conquer evil. Living and be living in the positive.